Advanced Speaking and Pronunciation. Video 7, Thought Groups and Changes in Focus. Part 1. Review. Focus words. As discussed in Video 5, focus words are those words that will receive the highest level of pitch in comparison to the other words in the sentence. This is because the focus word is considered to be the most important word or words in the sentence. Often the final content word of the sentence will receive the most focus. Part 2. Changes in focus. However, English speakers often will change the focus of the sentence depending on what their ultimate intention will be. This means that a speaker could place the focus on a structure word as well as a content word. Let's look at the most common situations where we can change focus in a sentence. Introducing new information. We often change the focus word to help represent the most important ideas shared in a conversation. This means that we will often place the focus on new information in order to emphasize the overall direction of the conversation. Let's look at a sample conversation. Now, to simplify things for this part of the video, we are going to use capital letters to indicate the focus word itself. Again, remember this is the word that will receive the highest pitch of the words in the sentence. So follow along. I just bought a hat. What kind of hat? A beach hat. It's really nice. Thanks. So again, notice in the first sentence, the focus was on the typical last content word. But in the next question, notice we did not put the focus on the word hat because that information had already been shared before. In this case, we would focus on the word that helps to emphasize that now we're looking for something new. What kind? The speaker then comes back to say it's not just any hat, but it's a beach hat. So in this case, now this becomes the new information. Going back then to the next response, we return to the final content word because it's describing the idea of the hat. And then, of course, the person gives a one-word thanks. So again, notice that each time we introduce something new, a new word, especially a word that might be describing something that's already mentioned, will receive the focus. Clarifying or correcting information. Another example of changing focus involves when a speaker wants to clarify or correct mistaken information given in an exchange or conversation. In these situations, sometimes the speaker will place focus on a structure word, especially if that is where the mistaken idea is located. Let's look at some examples. Let's look at these dialogues. You're studying American history, right? No, European history. So in this case, notice that in the first exchange here, the person thinks they're studying American history, but the second person wants to correct them and say it's not American, it's European. So in this case, this will become the focus word. Let's look at the next exchange. I have two friends I want to introduce you to. This is James, and this is Stephen. Actually, my name is Stephen, and this is James. Oops, sorry. So in this case, notice that in the original situation, the person had the names in the wrong order. So in this case, the person is emphasizing that it's not that this is not James, it's my name is Stephen. And the other person here is James. So again, notice in this case, we have emphasized the structure words, not the content words, because this is where the mistake is located. Special emphasis. Often a speaker may just want to place special emphasis in order to draw attention to the idea. Again, this doesn't always have to be a content word. It could also be a structure word if the speaker is trying to highlight a certain idea. Let's look at a couple of examples. Can you believe it? I just saw the Julia Roberts at the mall. So notice in the first example, the person has tried to emphasize that it's not just any Julia Roberts, but it's probably the famous actress Julia Roberts. So in this case, he said the, meaning that it's the only one. Let's look at the second example. The meeting starts at 10, no later. In this situation, again, we have emphasized a structure word because the person wants to emphasize that the meeting starts at this time, not a later time. Maybe because the person had been late to a previous meeting and the person wants to emphasize when the start time is for this meeting. Part 3. Thought groups. Thought groups, or TG, are ideas used primarily in spoken contexts to indicate to the listener how the particular words in the group relate to each other. Thought groups are often chunked or grouped together, usually by following common linking patterns, intonational patterns, appropriate recognition of pauses, and appropriate recognition of focus. Now, thought groups involve a fairly broad category. They can include or be defined by collocations, numbers, and punctuation. Let's start with collocations. Collocations are groups of words that naturally go together, are often culturally or contextually defined, and are often distinguished by their grammatical relationship, though not necessarily defined by it. Some of the most common collocations considered to be thought groups are paired options and choices. So, for example, in our paired options, you will notice how the intonational pattern works, and also, of course, how the linking pattern is going to work. Now, these words kind of go together because they're culturally defined, and especially here in the United States for the first one, we think of these words as always going together. Let's try it. Bacon and eggs. Bacon and eggs. Remember that and will also be reduced, and that bacon and will actually kind of link together. So in this case, when we hear this particular group, it sounds like the two ideas go together. This is a perfect example of a thought group. In the second example, this is more of a British collocation, but it still demonstrates how the words are going to go together. Let's try it. Fish and chips. Fish and chips. So notice again we have linking to help connect the and to the word fish, and the intonational pattern indicates that the two ideas somehow belong together. Now, a paired choice is similar, except we use the word or, and generally we try to put two things that kind of belong together, especially contextually. So here are a couple of questions that you might hear at a restaurant. Would you like cream or sugar? Would you like Coke or Pepsi? Now, sometimes you might hear a slight pause in between the first word and the word or, but oftentimes they will be linked together. So it kind of will sound like creamer or coker. But the idea is to listen to the intonation. So notice that both words will receive a fair amount of intonation. Of course, sugar and Pepsi might receive a little more because they're at the end of the sentence. But since both will get some kind of focus because they're both choices. So again, this particular paired choice sounds like they belong together. Numbers. Many numbers are considered to be thought groups as well, mostly because they involve special patterns of stress, pauses, and intonation to help distinguish them from each other. Examples include dates, math problems, addresses, personal numbers, including phone numbers, credit cards, and social security numbers. Let's take a look at some examples. For example, with dates, notice how the pauses will also help to separate information, and how the focus itself will be placed in a couple of places. So notice the intonational curves here to help us with pronunciation. August 5th, 1978. So notice the second half of 1978 will receive that high intonation, and August 5th, and then notice there's a pause here in the middle. So throughout the rest of the video, you will see that the break between the intonation here will represent a pause. Now let's try an address. 1421 Main Street, New York, New York, 00178. So again, notice the pauses in between, here indicated by the commas, but also to separate a number or group of numbers from the following idea. So for example, in an address, separating the street number from the actual street name. And then of course the street from the city from the state, and then finally the state from the zip code. Notice also that we will use O instead of 0 when it comes to giving address numbers. Next, phone numbers. Again, here in the United States, phone numbers are grouped together. First off, there are 10 or 11, depending on if you're dialing long distance. The area code is often separated in writing by parentheses, but we have to indicate this with the change in pitch. Then we will group the next 3 numbers together, pause, and then the last 4. Let's try it. 1 415 334 6987. Social Security numbers are basically grouped in patterns of 3, 2, and 4. Once again, we will generally put the focus on the last number of each particular part of the number, and pause in the middle. 1 2 3 4 5 9 9 9 0. Finally, with credit card numbers, generally credit card numbers come in numbers, a total of 16 numbers, often in groups of 4. Again, we will have pauses in between each group of 4, and the intonation will rise slightly on the last number. Let's try it. 4111 5556 9012 2137. And again, we might want to fall a little bit at the end there to indicate that that's the end of the number. Finally, we also use these particular groupings with math problems. Again, notice how the pauses and intonation will help to indicate how the numbers relate to each other. Let's try it. 5 minus 2 times 2 equals what? 3 times 3 plus 7 equals what? So again, notice we'll pause in between each particular idea in the kind of order of operations, and then put the final rising and falling pitch at the end. Now, punctuation, we have already seen how punctuation and intonation can work in video 5. We mentioned that sentences using a period will often have rising and falling intonation. WH questions will use rising and slight falling intonation. Yes or no questions will use rising intonation, and then often mid-sentence commas are often preceded by the hesitation intonation. Let's look at some other examples of thought groups using punctuation. Probably the most common thought group that we use is the idea of a series. Now, a series involves a list of at least 3 items. Notice how the intonation will rise on the first 2 words and then fall on the third. This will kind of help suspend the intonational pattern until we get to the end. Let's try this. I visited the museum, the library, and the park. So again, notice museum, library, park. These are the items on the particular list. So in this case, this is where we will pause in between each item and change the intonational pattern a bit until we actually finish at the end of the series. With quotes, again, it depends on who is actually saying the information. Let's look at the first example. John said, "The boss is absent." So again, notice the comma is going to help indicate the pause between the first part and then the actual quote itself. Now compare this to the different example here, where it's actually the boss who is speaking and not John. John, said the boss, is absent. So notice in this case, the middle part here, said the boss, the intonation is probably going to be a little bit lower than you would see in the first example. This is to help distinguish that the first part of the sentence is part of the quote, and that this interrupts the quote in the middle. For more on thought groups, see the links below in the About section of this video on our YouTube channel. And finally, a pronunciation tip. All of the examples in today's video help to illustrate the importance of focus, intonation, and linking. Remember that in English, it's not just what you say, it's how you say it. Part 4. Review. Focus words are usually the last content word of the sentence. They receive the highest level of pitch compared to the other words in the sentence. Speakers can change the focus word depending on their intention. They do this especially when they want to introduce new information in a conversation, clarify or correct information, or just place special emphasis. This also means that other content words, as well as structure words, can receive the focus in the sentence, depending on the situation. Thought groups are chunks of words that use specific patterns of focus and stress, intonation, linking, and pausing to help indicate how the words go together. Thought groups can include or be defined by collocations, numbers, and punctuation. Understanding thought groups is essential to recognizing the importance of not just the words we use, but also the way we say them. Once again, we want to remind you that we have several websites devoted to help you learn more about the English language. Included in our educational website series is the Speaking and Pronunciation website and our Vocabulary Development website. All of these are available at our main page, www.JenniferESL.org/class-websites. Thanks for watching our video series.